Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If it's not your first time watching, then you already know the drill. Grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into some stories that might make you feel better about your own life decisions. Our first story comes from someone who learned that helping a friend can sometimes mean enabling their worst habits. I'm 27 and have been living in my apartment for about 3 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood, but it's mine and I've worked hard to keep it nice. My buddy Jake and I have been friends since college, and he's always been the kind of guy who struggles to get his life together. Lost jobs, bad relationships, questionable financial decisions, you know the type. 6 months ago, Jake called me in a panic. He'd been evicted from his place and needed somewhere to crash for a few weeks while he figured things out. He promised it would be temporary, just until his next paycheck came through and he could afford a deposit on a new apartment. I've known Jake for almost 10 years, and despite his flaws, he's been there for me during some rough times. So I said yes. The first week was fine. Jake kept to himself, cleaned up after himself, and seemed genuinely grateful for the help. He'd come home from his job at the warehouse around 6:30 every evening, make dinner, and we'd watch some shows together before he'd head to bed early. It felt like having a roommate again, which honestly wasn't that bad. But then week 2 hit, and things started changing. Jake began coming home later and later, sometimes not until 10 or 11 at night. He'd skip making dinner and just order takeout, leaving the containers and trash scattered around the living room. When I'd mentioned the mess, he'd apologize and promise to clean it up, but it would sit there for days until I finally dealt with it myself. The temporary arrangement that was supposed to last a few weeks stretched into a month, then 2 months, then 3. Every time I'd bring up his plans for moving out, Jake would have some new excuse. His paycheck got delayed. The apartment he was looking at fell through. He needed to save up just a little bit more. There was always something preventing him from actually leaving. Around month 4, I discovered that Jake had been fired from his warehouse job. He'd been coming and going at normal times, pretending he was still working, but actually he'd been spending his days who knows where. When I confronted him about it, he broke down and admitted he'd lost the job 2 weeks earlier and was too embarrassed to tell me. I tried to be supportive. I helped him update his resume, gave him interview tips, even put in a good word with some of my own professional contacts. But Jake would sleep until noon, barely apply to any jobs, and spend most of his time playing video games in the spare bedroom. My temporary house guest had become a permanent dependent. The breaking point came when I got home early from work one day and found Jake having a full-blown party in my apartment. There were at least 15 people I'd never met before, drinking my beer, eating my food, and making themselves at home in my space. Music was blasting. Someone had spilled red wine on my carpet, and my bathroom was completely trashed. I completely lost it. I asked everyone to leave immediately, which created this awkward scene where Jake tried to convince me to let the party continue, while his friends slowly filtered out, shooting me dirty looks like I was the bad guy. After everyone left, Jake and I had the biggest fight of our friendship. He accused me of being controlling and not understanding how hard his situation was. He said that I'd offered to help him, but was now holding it over his head and making him feel like garbage for needing support. I pointed out that temporary help had turned into 6 months of free housing with no end in sight, and that I'd never signed up to bankroll his lifestyle while he made zero effort to improve his situation. Jake said that if I was going to be so ungrateful about helping a friend, maybe he should just leave. I called his bluff and told him he had 1 week to find somewhere else to stay. He seemed shocked that I was actually setting a deadline, like he'd never seriously considered that this arrangement would have to end eventually. The week passed in tense silence. Jake barely spoke to me, spending most of his time in the spare room or out of the apartment entirely. On the 7th day, he finally packed his stuff and moved in with another friend who apparently had more patience than I did. We haven't spoken since he left. Mutual friends tell me Jake's been talking about how I kicked him out when he needed help the most, that I'm not a real friend, that I abandoned him during a difficult time. Some people agree with him and think I was too harsh. Others say I let things go on way too long before finally setting boundaries. The apartment feels empty now, but also peaceful. I don't miss the mess, the excuses, or the feeling of being taken advantage of in my own home. But I do miss my friend, or at least the version of him I thought I knew. I keep wondering if I should have handled things differently, maybe been more patient, maybe given him more time. Then I remember the party, the lies about his job, and the 6 months of watching him make no effort to change his situation, and I know I made the right choice. That's the end of that story. Sometimes being a good friend means knowing when to stop enabling someone's worst habits, even if it costs you the friendship. Jake needed a wake-up call, not a permanent safety net. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that wedding planning can reveal some truly bizarre behavior from people you thought you knew well. I'm 32 and got married 4 months ago to my husband David. The wedding planning process was mostly smooth, except for one absolutely insane situation with my cousin Michelle. Michelle is 35, single, and has always been a bit intense about relationships and marriage. She's the type who comments on everyone's engagement photos with overly emotional responses and throws herself into other people's wedding planning with an enthusiasm that borders on obsessive. When David and I got engaged, Michelle immediately volunteered to help with everything. She wanted to come dress shopping, help pick flowers, coordinate with vendors, basically insert herself into every aspect of the planning. At first, I thought it was sweet that she cared so much, but her involvement quickly became overwhelming. The problems really started when we sent out save the dates. Michelle called me crying, saying that she'd noticed we'd listed the wedding as adults only, meaning no children under 16 were invited. She was devastated because she'd been planning to bring her friend's daughter as her plus one. I was confused because Michelle doesn't have kids, and the plus one was supposed to be for a date or partner, not a random child. When I asked why she wanted to bring a 10-year-old to my wedding, Michelle explained that she'd been working with a life coach who suggested she practice maternal behaviors by spending time with children. Apparently, bringing this kid to my wedding was part of her visualization exercises for manifesting future motherhood. The whole explanation was so bizarre that I didn't even know how to respond. I politely told Michelle that the adults-only policy applied to everyone and that plus ones were intended for significant others, not life coaching exercises. She got upset and said I was being unsupportive of her personal growth journey. Eventually, Michelle apologized and said she'd come to the wedding alone. I thought the situation was resolved until the actual wedding day arrived. Michelle showed up to the ceremony wearing a sash that said "Future Bride" in glittery letters and carrying a bouquet that was nearly identical to mine. She positioned herself at the end of the aisle before the ceremony started and tried to practice walking down it, pretending she was the bride. My wedding coordinator had to physically remove Michelle from the aisle and confiscate her sash and bouquet. Michelle threw a fit, claiming she was just trying to manifest her own future wedding by participating in the energy of mine. She said her life coach had recommended this as a powerful visualization technique. The ceremony proceeded without further incident, but during the reception, Michelle approached several single male guests and introduced herself as my sister bride, implying we were having some kind of joint wedding celebration. She told people she was practicing being a wife and asked if any of them wanted to dance with a future bride. My actual bridesmaids were horrified and tried to run interference, but Michelle was relentless. She even tried to participate in the bouquet toss despite not being single, and when I threw the bouquet, she literally tackled 2 other women to catch it. She then paraded around the reception, showing everyone her bouquet and talking about how this was a sign her wedding would be next. The final straw came when Michelle tried to cut the cake with us. She inserted herself between David and me during the cake-cutting photos, grabbed a knife, and started posing like she was part of the couple. Our photographer was completely bewildered and had to ask her multiple times to step aside. After the wedding, family members kept asking me what was wrong with Michelle and whether she needed professional help. I felt terrible because I didn't want to embarrass her, but her behavior had been so disruptive that it was all anyone could talk about. Looking at our wedding photos later, Michelle appears in the background of at least 30 shots, always positioning herself prominently and often making bride-like poses or gestures. I tried to have a gentle conversation with Michelle about her behavior, suggesting maybe she should talk to a therapist instead of a life coach. She got defensive and said I was jealous that she was manifesting her own happiness and that I couldn't handle her spiritual growth overshadowing my big day. We haven't spoken since, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to repair the relationship. That's the end of that story. Manifestation culture, taken to extremes, can turn normal people into wedding crashers in their own family. Michelle's life coach should probably be held accountable for suggesting someone hijack their cousin's wedding as a visualization exercise. Some therapeutic practices are just delusion with better marketing. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who learned that workplace collaboration can become theft when you're dealing with the wrong kind of colleague. I'm 29 and work as a software developer at a mid-sized tech company. I've been there for about 3 years and generally enjoy the work and the team environment. Last year, I started working on a major project that I'd pitched to management, a new inventory management system that would save the company significant money and improve efficiency across multiple departments. The project was my idea from start to finish. I'd identified the problem, researched solutions, created the initial proposal, and convinced leadership to greenlight development. It was going to be a huge career milestone for me, possibly leading to a promotion and definitely establishing me as someone who could drive innovation within the company. Management assigned another developer named Preston to work with me on the project. Preston had been with the company for about 5 years and had a reputation for being technically skilled but somewhat difficult to work with. I figured having another experienced developer on board would help move things along faster, so I welcomed the collaboration. The first few months of working together were productive. Preston and I would meet regularly to discuss progress, divide up tasks, and troubleshoot issues. He seemed genuinely interested in the project and contributed solid code to various components of the system. I was handling the architecture and most of the complex integrations, while Preston worked on user interface elements and some of the back-end logic. Around month 4, Preston started scheduling meetings with stakeholders without including me. I'd find out about these meetings secondhand when someone would mention something Preston had discussed about his project. When I asked Preston about it, he said he was just trying to be proactive about getting feedback, and that he didn't think I needed to be in every single stakeholder meeting. Then I noticed Preston had started referring to the project as the inventory system we're building when talking to other developers, carefully avoiding any mention of whose original idea it was. When I'd bring up something about my project, Preston would correct me and say, our project, which technically was accurate since we were both working on it, but it felt like he was deliberately erasing my role as the originator and primary architect. Things escalated when Preston volunteered to give a presentation about the project to senior leadership. The presentation was scheduled during a time when I'd previously requested time off for a family wedding, and Preston knew I wouldn't be available. I asked him to reschedule or let me present remotely, but he said the executives had limited availability and we needed to take the slot we were offered. I came back from my time off to discover that Preston's presentation had been a huge success. Multiple people congratulated me on our project and mentioned how impressed they were with Preston's vision and technical execution. When I looked at the presentation slides Preston had shared, there was almost no mention of my contributions. He presented the entire project as if he'd been the driving force behind it, occasionally mentioning my name as someone who helped with implementation. I was furious and immediately scheduled a meeting with Preston to confront him about the presentation. He acted completely innocent, saying that he'd given a comprehensive overview of the project and hadn't intended to minimize my contributions. He suggested I was being overly sensitive about credit, and that what mattered was the project's success, not who got recognition for it. I escalated the issue to our manager, explaining the pattern of behavior I'd observed over the past few months. I showed her the original project proposal with my name on it, the documentation showing I'd designed the system architecture, and the commit history proving I'd written the majority of the code. I explained how Preston had systematically positioned himself as the project lead while I'd been doing most of the actual work. My manager seemed sympathetic but also uncomfortable with the situation. She said that both Preston and I had made valuable contributions, and that she appreciated both of our efforts. She suggested we work on our communication and make sure we were both aligned on how we presented the project going forward. It was a completely unsatisfying response that didn't address the fundamental issue of Preston taking credit for my work. The situation came to a head when the project was completed, and management decided to promote Preston to senior developer based on his leadership on the inventory system project. I was given a small bonus and a thank you note for my support role in bringing the project to completion. Preston had successfully stolen not just credit for my idea, but the career advancement that should have come with it. I started looking for a new job immediately. During my exit interview a few months later, I explained exactly what had happened and how management's failure to properly attribute work had cost them a good employee. The HR representative seemed surprised and said she wished I'd brought up these concerns earlier, completely ignoring the fact that I had brought them up and been dismissed. I found out later that Preston tried the same thing with his next project, attempting to take credit for a junior developer's idea. That time management noticed the pattern, and he was formally reprimanded. But by then, I was already gone, and it didn't matter to me anymore. I'm now at a company that has clear policies about project attribution and intellectual property, and I make sure everything I work on is properly documented with my contributions clearly recorded. That's the end of that story. Workplace credit theft is real and can cost you promotions, recognition, and career advancement. Preston's strategy of slowly erasing someone's contributions while positioning himself as the leader is unfortunately common in corporate environments. The lesson here is to document everything, advocate loudly for yourself, and be willing to leave companies that don't properly value your contributions. Our next story takes us into the world of family vacation planning, where good intentions collide with completely incompatible travel styles. I'm 34 and have been trying to plan a family reunion vacation for the past year. My extended family is spread across different states, and we haven't all been together since before the pandemic. I thought organising a week-long trip where everyone could reconnect would be a wonderful way to strengthen family bonds and create lasting memories. The problem started immediately when I sent out a survey asking about everyone's preferences for location, timing, and activities. My sister wanted a beach resort with kids' clubs and organised activities. My brother insisted on a mountain cabin where we could hike and be in nature. My parents wanted to visit historical sites and museums, and my aunt demanded we go somewhere with excellent restaurants and shopping. I spent weeks trying to find a destination that would satisfy everyone's requirements. I eventually settled on a location in North Carolina that had beaches, mountains, history, and good dining options, all within a reasonable driving distance. I created a detailed itinerary that incorporated something for everyone, built in free time for people to do their own thing, and booked a large rental house where we could all stay together. The complaints started rolling in immediately. The house wasn't beachfront enough for my sister. The mountains weren't remote enough for my brother. The historical sites were too far from the house for my parents. The restaurants weren't upscale enough for my aunt. Everyone had something to criticize about the plans I'd spent months putting together. Then came the budget discussions. I'd estimated the trip would cost about $800 per person for accommodation, and everyone would handle their own food and activities. My sister said that was too expensive and she couldn't afford it with 3 kids. My brother said he wasn't paying that much to stay in a house when he could camp for free. My parents offered to cover some costs, but had specific ideas about how the money should be spent. My aunt said $800 was reasonable, but only if we upgraded to a nicer property. The vacation ended up happening with only half the family attending. My sister and brother both backed out at the last minute, leaving me with a huge house and having to cover their portions of the rental cost. My parents came but complained about the activities I'd planned. My aunt came but spent most of the time criticizing the restaurant choices and suggesting places we should have gone instead. That's the end of that story. Planning group vacations reveals exactly how incompatible your family members really are. Sometimes the effort of trying to please everyone just results in pleasing no one and wasting a lot of your own time and energy in the process. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who discovered that gym memberships can become battlegrounds for the pettiest of territorial disputes. I'm 31 and have been going to the same gym for about 4 years now. It's one of those 24-hour fitness places, nothing fancy, but it has all the equipment I need, and it's close to my apartment. I usually work out around 6 in the morning before heading to my job as an accountant, and over the years I've developed a pretty consistent routine. The gym has regular early morning crowd, and we've all sort of settled into an unspoken system. I typically use the squat rack near the back corner, another guy uses the bench press area, and there are a few women who claim the treadmills by the windows. It's not official or anything, just a natural pattern that's developed over years of showing up at the same time and respecting each other's space. About 6 months ago, a new guy started showing up to the gym right around my usual time. I'll call him Derek. Derek was probably in his mid-20s, very into fitness based on his physique, and completely oblivious to the established social dynamics of our morning group. He'd use whatever equipment he wanted, whenever he wanted it, with no regard for the patterns the rest of us had developed. At first, I tried to be understanding. Derek was new and didn't know the unwritten rules yet. I figured he'd observe for a few weeks and naturally adapt to the flow like everyone else had. But Derek wasn't interested in adapting. He'd walk straight to whatever equipment he wanted and set up camp there for 45 minutes, doing endless sets with long rest periods between each one. The real problem started when Derek decided he liked the squat rack I'd been using for 4 years. He started showing up at 5:45, 15 minutes before my usual arrival time, specifically to claim that rack before I got there. I know it was deliberate because I'd seen him working out at different times throughout the week, using different equipment. But at 6 a.m, he'd always be at my squat rack. I tried talking to Derek about it. I explained that I'd been using that particular rack at that particular time for years, and asked if he'd be willing to work in with me or use one of the other racks in the gym. Derek looked at me like I was insane and said that gym equipment was first come, first served, and that showing up earlier didn't give me any special claim to anything. Technically, he was right, but he was also being deliberately antagonistic. The situation escalated into a ridiculous competition of who could get to the gym earliest. I started showing up at 5:30 to claim the rack before Derek arrived. Then Derek started showing up at 5:15. Then I'd show up at 5. It got to the point where I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning just to beat this guy to a piece of gym equipment, which was absolutely insane when I really thought about it. Other gym members started noticing what was happening. Some thought it was funny and would make jokes about our squat rack war. Others thought we were both being ridiculous and needed to grow up. One guy suggested we just alternate days, which seemed like a reasonable compromise, but Derek refused to even discuss it. Things came to a head when I showed up at 4:45 one morning, thinking I'd finally beaten Derek's arrival time, only to find him already there, doing warm-up sets at the squat rack. He looked at me with this smug expression and said something like, "Guess you'll have to wake up earlier." That's when I realized how completely absurd the situation had become. I was destroying my sleep schedule and spending an extra hour at the gym every morning, all because I was too stubborn to use a different piece of equipment or adjust my workout routine. Derek had successfully trolled me into completely disrupting my life over something that didn't actually matter. I decided to break the cycle by switching to a different gym. I found another 24-hour fitness place, about 10 minutes further from my apartment, joined there, and went back to my normal 6 a.m. workout time. The new gym has multiple squat racks, a much less territorial morning crowd, and I haven't had a single conflict in the 4 months I've been going there. The funny part is that I ran into Derek at a coffee shop a few weeks after I switched gyms. He asked where I'd been and seemed almost disappointed that I'd left. I think he'd actually enjoyed our stupid competition and was bored now that I wasn't there to compete with. He suggested I should come back to the old gym and we could share the equipment like mature adults. I told him I was happy at my new gym and had no interest in resuming our territorial dispute. Looking back, I'm embarrassed about how much energy I invested in such a petty conflict. Derek was obviously in the wrong for deliberately antagonizing me, but I was equally wrong for letting him manipulate me into that exhausting pattern of behavior. The whole situation taught me that sometimes the best response to someone being unreasonable is to just remove yourself from the situation entirely rather than trying to win an unwinnable fight. The ego hit of losing the squat rack to Derek was nothing compared to the quality of life improvement I got from switching to a drama-free gym and getting proper sleep again. My workouts are better, my mood is better, and I haven't thought about Derek or that squat rack in months, except when telling this story. That's the end of that story. Gym territorial disputes can bring out the absolute worst in otherwise normal people. Sometimes walking away from a petty conflict is the most mature choice you can make, even if it feels like admitting defeat in the moment. Our next story comes from someone who learned that baby showers can become weapons in family power struggles. I'm 28 and pregnant with my first child. My husband and I are thrilled about becoming parents, and we've been enjoying the process of preparing for our daughter's arrival. My mother-in-law, Sandra, offered to host a baby shower for us, which I thought was a sweet and generous gesture. Sandra and I have always had a cordial relationship. She's very involved in her son's life, maybe a bit too involved sometimes, but overall she's been welcoming and kind to me since we started dating 7 years ago. When she offered to throw the shower, I assumed it would be a nice afternoon with family and close friends celebrating the baby. The problem started when Sandra asked for my guest list. I gave her about 25 names, family members, and close friends I wanted to share this special time with. Sandra said that seemed like a good size for an intimate gathering, and that she'd handle all the planning and invitations. I was relieved to have one less thing to worry about during my pregnancy. 2 weeks before the shower, I started getting calls from people I barely knew, asking about registry details and dress code for the baby shower. My husband's distant cousins, his co-workers' wives, Sandra's book club members, people I'd met maybe once or twice in my entire life. When I asked Sandra about it, she explained that she'd invited about 75 additional people because she wanted to properly celebrate her first grandchild. I tried to explain that I'd wanted a small, intimate gathering, not a massive party with strangers. Sandra got upset and said I was being ungrateful for all her hard work. She'd already sent invitations, booked a venue, ordered decorations, and put down deposits on catering. Cancelling or significantly reducing the guest list would be impossible at this point. The shower itself was overwhelming. Sandra had decorated the venue with a theme I'd never discussed with her, featuring colours and characters I don't particularly like. The games were all traditional baby shower games that I find embarrassing and uncomfortable, and I spent 3 hours making small talk with people I didn't know while opening gifts in front of a huge audience. The worst part was when Sandra gave a speech about how excited she was to finally be a grandmother and how she'd been waiting years for this moment. She talked about all the plans she had for the baby, the nursery she'd set up at her house, the activities they'd do together. She barely mentioned me or acknowledged that this was my baby, my pregnancy, my shower. It felt like she was hosting a celebration of her own impending grandmotherhood rather than supporting me as the actual mother. That's the end of that story. baby showers that get hijacked by overbearing family members, stop being about the parents, and become stages for someone else's fantasies and need for control. Sandra turned what should have been my special day into her personal grandparent debut party. Moving on to our next tale. This one involves a car lending situation that spiraled completely out of control. I'm 33 and have worked hard to maintain good credit and save money responsibly. Last year, I finally bought myself a nice car. Nothing extravagant, but a reliable newer model sedan that I'd been saving for. It was the first major purchase I'd made that felt like a real accomplishment, and I was proud of myself for being financially stable enough to afford it. My younger brother Tyler is 26 and has always struggled with money management. He's had a series of jobs that never seem to work out, makes impulsive purchases he can't afford, and generally lives paycheck to paycheck when he's actually employed. His car had been on its last legs for months, constantly breaking down and costing him more in repairs than it was worth. Tyler called me one evening, asking if he could borrow my car for a few days while his was in the shop. He said he had a job interview across town and needed reliable transportation to make a good impression. He promised he'd take excellent care of my car, fill up the gas tank, and have it back to me by the weekend. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The few days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. Every time I'd ask about returning my car, Tyler would have some new excuse. The repairs on his car were taking longer than expected. He'd gotten the job and needed transportation to get there. He was waiting on his first paycheck so he could afford to fix his own car. There was always something preventing him from giving my car back. After 3 weeks, I told Tyler I needed my car back immediately, regardless of his transportation situation. He got defensive and accused me of not caring about his success or wanting to help family members when they're struggling. I reminded him that borrowing my car for a few days had turned into nearly a month, and that I'd been incredibly accommodating, but needed my own vehicle back. Tyler agreed to return the car the next day. When he finally brought it back, I immediately noticed damage. There was a large dent in the passenger side door, a crack in the windshield, and scratches along the bumper. The interior smelled like cigarette smoke, even though I'd explicitly told Tyler not to smoke in my car. There were fast food wrappers and trash throughout the vehicle, and the gas tank was completely empty. When I confronted Tyler about the damage, he claimed it had all been there before and that I was trying to blame him for pre-existing issues. I pulled out photos I'd taken of my car before lending it to him, showing that everything he'd damaged had been perfect condition. Tyler then changed his story and said the damage had happened in a parking lot while he was at work, implying it wasn't his fault because someone else had hit the car. I asked Tyler if he'd gotten insurance information from whoever hit my car or filed a police report. He admitted he hadn't done either of those things, which meant I'd have to pay my deductible to get the damage fixed through my own insurance, likely causing my rates to increase. When I told Tyler he needed to pay for the repairs since the damage happened while he was using my car, he said he didn't have the money and accused me of being heartless for expecting him to cover costs he couldn't afford. The repair estimates came to over $2,300. The dent required panel replacement, the windshield needed to be replaced entirely, and fixing the scratches meant repainting the entire bumper. Tyler claimed these estimates were inflated and that I should just go to a cheaper shop, but the quotes were from reputable places and reflected the actual cost of quality repairs. I told Tyler I'd pay for the repairs myself, but expected him to pay me back over time, even if it took months of payment plans. He agreed initially, but after I paid for the work, Tyler suddenly became impossible to reach. He'd ignore my calls, not respond to texts, and avoid family gatherings where he might see me. Our parents tried to mediate, but Tyler maintained that I was being unreasonable for expecting him to pay for damage he claimed wasn't his fault. 6 months later, I haven't received a single dollar from Tyler. He's blocked me on social media, changed his phone number, and essentially cut me out of his life rather than take responsibility for destroying my car. My parents think I should just forgive the debt and move on, because family is more important than money. But I can't get past the fact that Tyler borrowed something valuable and not destroyed it through carelessness, and then disappeared rather than make things right. The whole situation has fundamentally changed my relationship with my brother. I used to see him as someone who was struggling but trying his best. Now I see him as someone who will take advantage of people's kindness and then blame them when there are consequences. I've learned a hard lesson about lending expensive items to people who've demonstrated poor responsibility, even when those people are family members you want to help. I'll never lend Tyler anything again, and I'll never trust him to follow through on promises or take responsibility for his actions. That might sound harsh, but he's proven through his behavior that he doesn't respect other people's property or value the sacrifices others make to help him. The $2,300 loss was expensive, but learning this lesson about Tyler's character before lending him something even more valuable might have saved me from even worse situations down the road. That's the end of that story. Lending your car to unreliable family members is just giving them an opportunity to prove exactly how unreliable they are. Tyler's pattern of making excuses, causing damage, and then disappearing shows that some people would rather lose relationships than take responsibility for their actions. Our final story for this collection comes from someone who discovered that throwing house parties can reveal exactly which friends respect your home and which ones view it as a free venue for chaos. I'm 29 and bought my first house about a year ago. It's a modest 3-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but I'm incredibly proud of it. After years of saving and working my way up from entry-level positions, owning a home felt like a major life achievement. I'd had a small housewarming party when I first moved in, just close friends and family, and it went well. Everyone was respectful, cleaned up after themselves, and genuinely seemed happy for me. A few months later, my friend Marcus suggested I host a bigger party for our extended friend group. Marcus has always been the social coordinator of our circle, the guy who knows everyone and loves bringing people together. He offered to help organize everything, handle the invitations, even contribute money for food and drinks. I figured it would be a fun way to show off my place and have a good time with friends. I hadn't seen much since buying the house and being consumed with renovations and furniture shopping. Marcus said he'd invite about 30 people, which seemed manageable for my house size. I cleared out my garage to give people more space, set up outdoor seating in the backyard, and stocked up on drinks and snacks. Marcus showed up early to help set up, bringing several coolers of beer and some basic decorations. Everything seemed well organized and under control. The first red flag should have been when people started arriving at 7 in the evening, and Marcus was still telling me a few more people were on their way. By 8 o'clock, there were easily 60 people in and around my house. By 9:30, there had to be close to 100. People I'd never met before were streaming through my front door, many of them bringing their own friends, who then invited more people. Marcus had apparently posted about the party on social media and told people to spread the word. I tried to talk to Marcus about the out-of-control guest list, but he was already drunk and kept telling me to relax and enjoy my own party. He said this was great, that my house was the new spot for our friend group, that I should be happy so many people wanted to come. Meanwhile, strangers were going through my bedroom, someone had broken a glass in my kitchen, and my bathroom was completely trashed with the door, not even closing properly anymore. Around 10:45, my neighbors started complaining about the noise and the cars parked blocking their driveways. I tried to get people to quiet down and move their vehicles, but at that point, the party had taken on a life of its own. Music was blasting from multiple speakers, people were doing shots in my kitchen, and someone had started a small fire in my backyard fire pit that was way too large and way too close to my fence. The worst incident happened around 11:30, when I discovered people in my master bedroom going through my closet and dresser drawers. A group of girls I'd never seen before were trying on my clothes and taking photos in my bedroom for social media. When I asked them to leave and stop touching my things, they acted like I was being uptight and ruining the fun. One of them actually said, "If you're going to throw a party, you have to expect people to explore." I started trying to shut the party down around midnight, but people weren't leaving. I'd tell groups they needed to go, and they'd just move to a different room or go outside. Marcus was passed out on my couch, completely useless for helping end the event he'd created. Other friends I'd actually invited were either too drunk to help or had already left when things got out of hand. By 1 a.m, I was ready to call the police on my own party. That's when my neighbour actually did call them for me because of ongoing noise complaints. The police showing up finally got people moving, but not before several of my actual friends got hassled by cops who couldn't distinguish between people I'd invited and the random crashers who'd shown up. The aftermath was devastating. My house was completely destroyed. Every room had some kind of damage or disgusting mess. Someone had vomited in my hallway and not bothered to clean it up. Multiple glasses and dishes were broken. My bathroom door was off its hinges. There were cigarette burns on my deck furniture. Someone had spilled an entire bottle of red wine on my living room carpet, leaving a massive stain. My kitchen was covered in sticky residue from spilled drinks and food. One of my bedroom windows had a crack in it. And there was trash everywhere, inside and outside the house. The cleaning process took an entire weekend and cost me over $600 in professional carpet cleaning, minor repairs, and replacing damaged items. Marcus finally sobered up Sunday afternoon and came over to survey the damage. His reaction was to laugh and say, "Man, that was crazy," like the destruction of my house was just a funny story rather than a nightmare I'd have to deal with. I told Marcus he needed to help pay for the damages since he'd organised the party and invited way more people than we'd agreed on. He said he'd contributed money for drinks and food, implying that was enough and that I couldn't hold him responsible for what other people did. When I pointed out that he'd invited those other people and explicitly told them to spread the word, Marcus said I was being dramatic and that property damage was just part of throwing parties. We're not friends anymore. Marcus told people I'd overreacted about normal party wear and tear and tried to make me pay for everything. He positioned himself as the victim of my unreasonable expectations, conveniently leaving out the part where he'd tripled the guest count without permission and invited random strangers to trash my house. Some of our mutual friends sided with him, saying I should have expected things to get messy when throwing a large party. But the friends who actually matter, the ones who were at that original housewarming and saw how I take care of my home, understood exactly what had happened. They'd watched Marcus turn what should have been a fun gathering into an uncontrollable rager that damaged my property and created problems with my neighbours. A few of them even reached out to offer to help with repairs or contribute money toward the damages, which I appreciated but declined. I've learned several important lessons from this experience. First, never let someone else control the guest list for an event at your home. Second, people who don't own property don't understand or respect the value of maintaining it. Third, supposed friends who prioritize their own fun over your well-being aren't actually friends. And fourth, some life lessons are expensive but necessary. My house is repaired now, and I've been much more careful about who I invite over and under what circumstances. I'll never throw another large party, and I've made it clear to my remaining friends that my home isn't available as a venue for their social experiments. Some people think I'm being paranoid or antisocial, but I don't care. I worked too hard for this house to let anyone treat it like a disposable party space again. That's the end of that story. House parties can be fun when everyone respects boundaries and property, but they can quickly become nightmares when you let the wrong person take control of planning. Marcus showed his true colours by prioritising social clout over respecting my home, and the friends who sided with him revealed they valued party culture over basic human decency and respect for other people's property. Our next story comes from someone who learned that being a good neighbour doesn't mean tolerating theft. I'm 35 and have lived in my current house for about 8 years. It's a quiet suburban street where most people keep to themselves but are generally friendly when you run into them. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I'm around during the day more than most of my neighbors who have traditional office jobs. About a year ago, I started noticing that packages were disappearing from my front porch. At first, I thought maybe I'd misremembered ordering things, or that delivery drivers were marking items as delivered before actually dropping them off. But it kept happening with enough frequency that I knew something was wrong. I'd get a notification that a package had been delivered, check my porch within 10 minutes, and find nothing there. I decided to install a doorbell camera to figure out what was going on. The footage I captured was infuriating. My neighbor from 3 houses down, a guy I'll call Spencer, was walking past my house multiple times a day. Every time a delivery truck would stop at my place, Spencer would wait until the driver left and then casually stroll up to my porch and take whatever had been delivered. He'd tuck the packages under his arm, like they belonged to him, and walk back to his house like this was completely normal behavior. I confronted Spencer with the video footage. He initially denied everything, claiming I must have him confused with someone else. When I showed him clear images of his face from my camera, he changed his story and said he'd been holding the packages for me because he was worried about porch pirates in the neighborhood. He claimed he'd been planning to drop them off at my house later, but kept forgetting. I asked Spencer where all my packages were then, since he'd apparently been collecting them for safekeeping. He said he'd left them on my porch during times when I must have been out. It was obvious he was lying. The camera footage showed him taking packages and walking straight back to his house, never once attempting to actually deliver anything to me. I told Spencer I wanted my stolen items back immediately, or I'd be filing a police report. He got defensive and angry, saying I was being unreasonable and that neighbors should help each other out instead of threatening legal action. He actually tried to make himself the victim in this situation, acting like I was the bad guy for catching him stealing. Spencer eventually admitted he'd opened some of the packages and couldn't return them. He said he thought they were misdelivered items that no one would miss. When I pointed out that his name and address were nothing like mine and that these were clearly not misdeliveries, he just shrugged and said he'd made an honest mistake. I filed a police report with all the camera footage. Spencer was charged with multiple counts of mail theft, which is a federal offense. He tried to get other neighbors to vouch for his character and paint me as someone overreacting to a simple misunderstanding, but the video evidence was undeniable. Several other neighbors came forward after seeing the police at Spencer's house, saying they'd also had packages go missing and suspected him but had no proof. Spencer ended up pleading guilty to avoid trial. He had to pay restitution for all the stolen items, got probation, and had to do community service. He also had to move out of the neighborhood because he couldn't afford his house after losing his job over the criminal charges. His employer apparently had a zero-tolerance policy for theft-related offenses. The other neighbors on our street thanked me for finally catching the person who'd been stealing everyone's deliveries. Apparently, Spencer had been doing this for over 2 years, and I was just the first person to actually install a camera and catch him in the act. The amount of stuff he'd stolen from various houses totaled over $11,000, according to the investigation. Some of Spencer's friends and family members tried to contact me, asking if I'd be willing to write a letter to the court, asking for leniency. They painted him as a good person who'd made some bad choices and didn't deserve to have his life ruined over packages. I declined. Spencer hadn't accidentally taken 1 or 2 packages. He'd been systematically stealing from his neighbors for years, showing no remorse until he got caught, and even then tried to lie and manipulate his way out of consequences. The whole situation taught me that some people will take advantage of any opportunity to benefit themselves at others' expense, even when it means stealing from people they see regularly and share a community with. Spencer could have just ordered his own items or gone without, but instead he chose to steal from neighbors who'd never done anything to him. I still have the camera installed, and package theft hasn't been an issue since Spencer moved away. The neighborhood feels safer knowing the person who'd been stealing from everyone is gone. And I learned that sometimes being a good neighbor means holding people accountable for bad behavior rather than letting things slide to avoid confrontation. That's the end of that story. Porch pirates who live in your own neighborhood are a special kind of bold. Spencer really thought he could just keep stealing packages indefinitely with no consequences. Installing that camera was the best $75 I've ever spent. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that setting boundaries with friends can cost you the entire friendship. I'm 26 and have been best friends with Lisa since we met in college 8 years ago. We'd been through everything together, roommates for 2 years, bridesmaids in each other's sisters' weddings, the whole 9 yards of close friendship. Lisa started dating her boyfriend Mark about 3 years ago, and initially I was happy for her because she seemed genuinely excited about the relationship. The problems started subtly. Lisa and Mark would come over to my apartment to hang out, which was fine at first, but gradually their visits became more frequent and longer. They'd show up on Friday evening and not leave until Sunday afternoon. Mark started leaving his stuff at my place. Toiletries in my bathroom, clothes in my spare room, snacks in my kitchen with his name on them. I tried to address it gently, mentioning to Lisa that while I loved spending time with her, maybe Mark could stay at his own place sometimes and give us space for just the two of us to hang out. Lisa acted hurt and said I was being unwelcoming to Mark, that couples are a package deal and I needed to accept that. The situation escalated when I came home from work one day to find Mark at my apartment alone. He'd let himself in, using the spare key I'd given Lisa for emergencies. He said he'd had a rough day and needed somewhere quiet to decompress, so he'd decided to come to my place since his apartment was too noisy. He was eating my food, watching my TV, and acting like this was completely normal. I told Mark he couldn't just let himself into my apartment whenever he felt like it, that the key was for Lisa in case of emergencies, not for him to use as a second home. Mark got defensive and said I was being possessive, and that Lisa had told him he was always welcome at my place. When I talked to Lisa about it later, she confirmed that she'd told Mark he could use my apartment whenever he wanted because that's what friends do for each other. Things got worse from there. Mark started staying over even when Lisa wasn't there. He'd show up after work and hang out until late at night, raid my fridge, use my shower, and generally treat my apartment like it was his own. When I'd ask him to leave, he'd act offended and text Lisa that I was being mean to him. Lisa started getting angry with me about how I was treating Mark. She said I was jealous of their relationship and trying to drive a wedge between them by making Mark feel unwelcome. She accused me of being a bad friend who couldn't be happy for her finding love. No matter how many times I tried to explain that the issue wasn't Mark himself, but the boundary violations, Lisa refused to understand. The final straw came when I returned from a weekend trip to visit my family and found that Lisa and Mark had essentially moved into my apartment while I was gone. They'd rearranged my furniture, had people over for a party that left my place trashed, and Mark had even set up his gaming console in my living room. When I confronted them, Lisa said they'd been apartment sitting for me, and I should be grateful they'd kept an eye on the place. I told Lisa I wanted my spare key back, and that she and Mark were no longer welcome to come over without explicit prior permission. Lisa completely lost it. She said I was ending our friendship over stupid boundaries, and that I clearly valued my space more than I valued her. She called me selfish, controlling, and a terrible friend. Mark chimed in, saying I was one of the most unwelcoming people he'd ever met. They both left in a huff, and I changed my locks the next day because I wasn't entirely sure Lisa would actually return the spare key. She sent me a long text message about how disappointed she was in me and how our friendship couldn't survive if I was going to prioritize material possessions over human relationships. Several of our mutual friends reached out saying they'd heard I'd kicked Lisa out of my apartment and asking what had happened. Lisa had told everyone a version of events where I'd randomly decided I didn't want her around anymore and had banned her boyfriend from my apartment for no reason. She left out all the parts about them treating my home like their personal space, about Mark letting himself in when I wasn't there, about the party they'd thrown in my apartment without permission. Some friends believed my side of the story. Others took Lisa's side and a few just wanted to stay out of it entirely. The friend group essentially split, and several people stopped inviting me to things because they didn't want to navigate the tension between Lisa and me. Looking back, I can see that Lisa had been slowly pushing boundaries for months, testing how much she could get away with before I'd finally push back. Mark either enabled this behavior or actively participated in it, and neither of them saw anything wrong with essentially colonizing my living space without permission or compensation. I don't regret setting the boundary, but I do regret not setting it sooner. If I'd addressed the issue the first time Mark stayed over without me being comfortable with it, or the first time they overstayed their welcome, maybe the friendship could have been saved. Instead, I let resentment build until I finally snapped, and by then the relationship was too damaged to repair. That's the end of that story. Friendships that can't survive basic boundaries aren't worth keeping. Lisa showed her true colors when asked to respect someone else's space and autonomy. Some people will take everything you offer and then get angry when you finally say enough. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who learned that group vacation planning can reveal exactly who expects everyone else to fund their fun. I'm 31 and part of a friend group that's been close since graduate school. There are 8 of us total, and we try to do a group trip once a year to stay connected, now that we're all scattered across different cities with demanding careers. Last year, my friend Rachel volunteered to organize our annual trip, suggesting we rent a beach house in Florida for a week in July. Rachel sent out a proposal with cost breakdowns. The house rental would be $4,000 for the week, which divided 8 ways came to $500 per person. Then there were groceries, activities, and dining out, which Rachel estimated at another $300 per person for the week, so roughly $800 total, plus whatever we each spent on flights to get there. Everyone agreed this seemed reasonable, and we all confirmed we were in. Rachel booked the house, taking a deposit from everyone to secure the reservation. Over the next few months, she'd send updates about her planning, mentioning restaurants she wanted to try and activities she thought would be fun for the group. We all arrived at the beach house on the designated Saturday in July. The house was beautiful, right on the beach with enough bedrooms for everyone. That first evening, Rachel suggested we all go out to dinner at a seafood restaurant she'd been excited about. The meal was great, and when the check came, it was about $450 for the 8 of us. Rachel announced that since she'd organized the trip, she shouldn't have to pay for any group meals or activities. She said her compensation for all the planning work was not having to contribute to shared expenses beyond her portion of the house rental. This was the first any of us had heard about this arrangement. The rest of us exchanged uncomfortable looks. If Rachel wasn't paying her share, that $450 dinner bill divided 7 ways instead of 8, meaning we each owed about $64 instead of $56. It didn't seem like a huge difference for one meal, so everyone just paid their portion without arguing. But there was definitely some tension. The next day, Rachel wanted to rent jet skis for everyone. The rental company quoted $320 for the group. Again, Rachel announced she wouldn't be contributing since she'd organized the trip. Then she wanted to book a sunset dinner cruise, and when that came to $700 for all of us, she again expected her portion to be covered by everyone else. By day 3, the rest of us were getting frustrated. We had a group conversation without Rachel where we calculated how much her planning fee was actually costing everyone. Between shared meals, activities, and groceries, Rachel was expecting about $400 worth of expenses to be covered by the rest of us. That meant we were each paying an extra $57 or so to subsidize Rachel's vacation. Someone suggested we talk to Rachel about it, explain that we'd never agreed to this arrangement, and that organizing the trip didn't entitle her to a free vacation at our expense. But others worried about creating conflict and ruining the trip, so we decided to just finish out the week and address it later. Rachel continued suggesting expensive activities and nice restaurants, never offering to pay her share, and always reminding everyone that she'd done all the work of planning. By the end of the week, We calculated she'd avoided paying about $630 in shared expenses that the rest of us had split. After we got home, I sent Rachel a message explaining that while we appreciated her organizing the trip, we hadn't agreed to cover all her expenses as payment for planning. I said that, in the future, if someone wanted compensation for organizing a trip, that needed to be discussed up front, so everyone could decide whether they were comfortable with that arrangement. Rachel's response was defensive and angry. She said she'd spent dozens of hours researching houses, reading reviews, comparing prices, and planning activities. She felt her time and effort were worth far more than the $600 in expenses she hadn't paid. She accused us of being cheap and ungrateful, saying she'd never organize anything for us again. Several other people from the trip reached out to Rachel with similar messages, explaining that we'd all been caught off guard by her expectations, and that it wasn't fair to spring that on everyone after we'd already agreed to the trip budget. Rachel doubled down, insisting that everyone knows trip organizers don't pay full expenses, and that we were being ridiculous. The friend group has been awkward ever since. Rachel rarely joins our group chats and declined to participate in planning this year's trip. A few people think we overreacted and should have just let her have the free vacation as thanks for organizing. Most of us feel that she manipulated the situation by not being upfront about her expectations and then guilting everyone into paying for her throughout the week. What bothers me most is that Rachel never asked if we'd be comfortable with this arrangement. She made a unilateral decision that benefited her financially and put everyone else in an uncomfortable position where we'd either have to pay extra or look like the bad guys for confronting her. If she'd proposed up front that the trip organizer gets their expenses covered, we could have discussed it as a group and decided whether that was fair. Instead, she ambushed us with it and then acted like we were wrong for questioning her. I've learned that any group trip needs crystal clear agreements about costs before anyone books anything. Every expense should be discussed and agreed upon ahead of time, and any special arrangements for organisers or anyone else need to be negotiated when everyone still has the option to back out if they're not comfortable with the terms. That's the end of that story. Group vacation planning brings out people's true colours when money is involved. Rachel essentially charged everyone a planning fee without their consent and then acted like a victim when called out on it. Transparency about costs is the foundation of fair group travel, and springing financial surprises on people mid-trip is manipulative. Our next story takes us into the world of workplace recognition, where good deeds can be weaponized by colleagues seeking advancement. I'm 28 and work in pharmaceutical sales, a field where your success is measured in numbers and client relationships matter more than almost anything else. I'd been working on landing a major hospital system as a client for about 8 months. This was a huge potential account, worth approximately $350,000 annually in commissions across our entire team, if we could close the deal. The head of procurement at this hospital system was notoriously difficult to even get meetings with, let alone convince to switch suppliers. I'd been slowly building a relationship through attending industry conferences, providing helpful information without pushing for a sale, and generally positioning myself as a valuable resource rather than just another sales rep trying to meet quota. My co-worker Danielle had been with the company about 6 months longer than me and had always been friendly in a professional way. We'd grab coffee occasionally, commiserate about difficult clients, that sort of thing. When I mentioned I was getting close to finally having a real conversation with the hospital system's decision maker, Danielle seemed genuinely excited for me and asked if there was anything she could do to help. I mentioned that the procurement head was going to be at an industry dinner that neither of us had tickets to, and I was trying to figure out how to get an invitation. Danielle said she knew someone on the planning committee and might be able to get me in. A few days later, she told me she'd secured a ticket for me and wished me luck. The dinner went perfectly. I finally got real face time with the procurement head, made a strong impression, and left feeling confident that we were close to closing the deal. I thanked Danielle profusely for helping me get the ticket and offered to return the favour however I could. 2 weeks later, I got the call that the hospital system was ready to move forward with our company as their primary supplier. It was the biggest win of my career, and I was thrilled. I immediately emailed our regional manager to let him know, copying the rest of the team, including Danielle, so everyone could celebrate the win together. That's when things got weird. Danielle replied to my email saying she was so glad our partnership approach worked, and that she was excited about the account we'd brought in together. I was confused because, other than getting me the dinner ticket, Danielle hadn't been involved in any part of the 8-month process of landing this client. Before I could respond, Danielle had scheduled a meeting with our regional manager to discuss the hospital system account and next steps. In that meeting, which I wasn't initially invited to, Danielle apparently presented herself as having been instrumental in closing the deal. She told our manager that she'd been working behind the scenes, that getting me into that industry dinner had been the key to the whole thing, and that she deserved credit for the strategic thinking that had made it all possible. Our manager called me in after meeting with Danielle and asked about her level of involvement in landing the account. I explained honestly that Danielle had helped me get a dinner ticket, which I was grateful for, but that I'd been working on this client relationship for 8 months and had done all the actual sales work. The dinner ticket was helpful, but not remotely close to being the deciding factor in closing the deal. The manager seemed to believe me, but Danielle had already planted seeds of doubt about whether I was trying to take sole credit for what she'd positioned as a team effort. She started telling other colleagues that she'd helped land the hospital account, gradually inflating her role each time she told the story. By the time our quarterly sales meeting rolled around, Danielle had convinced several people that she'd been my partner on the account from the beginning. When awards were given out for major client acquisitions, Danielle actually looked surprised and upset when only my name was called for the hospital system win. After the meeting, Danielle approached me and said she felt I'd cut her out of recognition she deserved. She brought up the dinner ticket again, now claiming that without her connection, I never would have closed the deal. When I pointed out that she'd done me one favor in an 8-month process, she accused me of being ungrateful and minimizing her contributions. The situation escalated when Danielle filed a formal complaint with HR, claiming I'd taken credit for her work and created a hostile work environment by excluding her from the recognition she'd earned. HR had to do an investigation, interviewing both of us and reviewing emails and documentation about the account. Fortunately, I had comprehensive records of every interaction with the hospital system, every meeting, every email, every phone call. The documentation clearly showed that I'd been the sole person working on this account, and that Danielle's involvement had been limited to getting me one dinner invitation. HR dismissed her complaint and actually gave her a warning about making false accusations against colleagues. Danielle stopped speaking to me after that. She'd tell other people I'd thrown her under the bus with HR and that I was threatened by successful women in the workplace. A few colleagues who didn't know the full story seemed to believe her version of events, but most people saw through her attempts to claim credit for work she hadn't done. The whole situation taught me to be very careful about sharing information about major deals before they're closed, and to explicitly define contributions when working with colleagues on anything important. Danielle had tried to turn one small favor into a narrative where she'd been essential to my biggest career success, and she'd nearly succeeded in convincing management and colleagues that her version was true. I've since closed several other major accounts without mentioning them to Danielle or asking for her help with anything. She eventually left the company for a competitor, and I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried similar tactics there, attempting to claim credit for deals other people had closed. Apparently her reputation caught up with her, and she's now struggling to find work in our industry because word has spread about her dishonest approach to career advancement. That's the end of that story. Workplace credit theft doesn't always look like someone stealing your entire project. Sometimes it's someone taking a minor helpful gesture and inflating it into a major contribution they can claim recognition for. Danielle's strategy of inserting herself into other people's success stories ultimately backfired, but not before causing significant drama and potentially damaging relationships with colleagues who believed her version of events. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who learned that family members can have wildly different ideas about what constitutes reasonable use of your property. I'm 36 and bought a vacation condo in the mountains about 3 years ago. It's a 2-bedroom place in a ski resort town, about a 4-hour drive from where I live. I use it maybe once a month during ski season and a few times in summer for hiking. The rest of the time it sits empty, which I'm completely fine with because I bought it as a long-term investment and personal retreat, not as a rental property. My sister Karen is 41 and has 3 kids ages 8, 11 and 13. She's always been the type to ask for favors and not really understand when people say no. When I first bought the condo, Karen mentioned how great it would be for her family to have a mountain getaway. I said she was welcome to use it occasionally if she coordinated with me about timing. Karen and her family went up to the condo twice that first year, both times when I'd explicitly told her the place was available. They seemed to take care of it reasonably well, though Karen never offered to help with utilities or contribute anything toward the mortgage or maintenance. I didn't push the issue because family helping family seemed reasonable for occasional use. Year 2, Karen started asking to use the condo more frequently. What had been twice a year became once every couple months. She'd coordinate with me less and less, sometimes just informing me she was taking her family up for the weekend rather than asking if it was available. A few times I had to tell her no because I'd already made plans to be there myself, and she'd act disappointed like I was being selfish with my own property. The breaking point came when I decided to drive up to the condo one Friday evening without telling anyone, planning a spontaneous weekend alone. When I arrived around 9 at night, I found Karen's family already there. They'd let themselves in somehow, and the place was full of their stuff. Karen seemed surprised to see me and said she'd assumed I wouldn't mind if they used it for spring break since I hadn't mentioned having plans. I asked Karen how she'd gotten in since I hadn't given her a key. She admitted she'd had a copy made the first time I'd let them use the place. She said she figured that would be more convenient than having to coordinate with me every time they wanted to go to the mountains. She'd essentially given herself unlimited access to my property without permission. I was furious, but tried to stay calm since her kids were there. I told Karen this wasn't okay, and that she needed to give me back all copies of the key. She got defensive and said I was being unreasonable, that the condo sat empty most of the time anyway, and that family should be able to share resources. She couldn't seem to understand that my property sitting empty by my choice was different from her having unauthorized access whenever she wanted. Karen refused to leave that weekend, saying she'd already told her kids they were having a ski vacation and she wasn't going to disappoint them because I'd decided to show up unannounced. I ended up leaving and driving back home, too frustrated and uncomfortable to stay there with Karen acting like I was the intruder. After that weekend, I had the locks changed on the condo. When Karen found out, she called me furious, saying I was being petty and punishing her children for a misunderstanding. She claimed she'd had a key made for emergency purposes and had only used the condo when she thought I wouldn't need it. I explained to Karen that making a copy of someone's house key without permission is not okay, and that using someone else's property whenever you feel like it isn't a small misunderstanding. She accused me of valuing material possessions over family relationships and said I was being selfish for not letting her kids enjoy the condo I rarely used. Our parents got involved, with my mother suggesting I should just let Karen have access since I'm not using the place most of the time anyway. She said siblings should share, and that I was being difficult by making a big deal out of Karen occasionally using the condo. My father was more sympathetic to my position, but still thought I should find some way to compromise. I told everyone that the condo was off limits to Karen and her family permanently. The violation of making an unauthorized key and then showing up whenever she wanted had destroyed my trust. Karen called me selfish and materialistic, saying I'd chosen a vacation condo over my relationship with my nieces and nephew. We didn't speak for almost 6 months. Eventually, Karen apologized, but in a way that made it clear she still didn't think she'd done anything seriously wrong. She said she was sorry for the misunderstanding about the key and hoped we could move past it. She never actually acknowledged that she'd violated my property rights and my trust. I've maintained my boundary that Karen and her family can't use the condo. Some extended family members think I'm being harsh and holding a grudge over something relatively minor. They don't seem to understand that it's not about one incident. It's about Karen's fundamental lack of respect for boundaries and her entitlement to my property just because we share DNA. The condo remains my personal retreat, and I haven't offered to let any other family members use it. The situation with Karen taught me that mixing family and property ownership leads to expectations and conflicts that aren't worth the temporary goodwill of letting people use your stuff. That's the end of that story. Family members who think your property is their property just because it's not being used every single day don't understand the concept of ownership or boundaries. Karen's sense of entitlement to unlimited access because we're siblings revealed that she values what I have more than she values respecting me as an independent person with property rights. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that chronic lateness can be a form of disrespect masquerading as a personality quirk. I'm 29 and have been friends with Jenna since high school. She's always been what people call chronically late, showing up to things 30 to 45 minutes after the agreed time. When we were teenagers, it was annoying but not a huge deal. As adults with jobs and responsibilities, her lateness has become a serious problem that affects everyone around her. The issue came to a head when I was planning my birthday dinner last month. I made a reservation at a nice restaurant for 7:30 on a Saturday evening. I invited 6 friends, including Jenna, and emphasized that the reservation was firm and people needed to be on time or we'd lose our table. The restaurant was popular and had a strict policy about seating incomplete parties. Everyone confirmed they'd be there by 7:15 to have a buffer before our seating time. Jenna said she'd be there, though she added, "You know me, I might be a few minutes late," with a laughing emoji like her inability to be on time was charming rather than disrespectful. 7:15 came and 5 people were there. No Jenna. 7:25, still no Jenna, and she hadn't texted any updates. At 7:30, the restaurant needed to know if we were ready to be seated. I tried calling Jenna and got no answer. I texted her and received a response saying she was almost there, order me a drink. We had to make a decision. Either wait for Jenna and risk losing our reservation, or be seated without her. I decided we'd be seated since 5 out of 6 people had managed to be on time. The restaurant said they'd try to accommodate Jenna when she arrived, but couldn't guarantee anything since we had a 6-person reservation and the dining room was fully booked. Jenna finally showed up at 8:20, almost an hour after our reservation time. She breezed in acting like everything was fine, apologizing in a casual way that made it clear she didn't think her lateness was a big deal. The restaurant couldn't seat her at our table because it was configured for 6 and there was no room to add a chair without blocking the aisle. Jenna would have to eat at the bar or wait until another table opened up. Jenna was upset about being excluded from the table. She acted like this was something that had happened to her rather than a consequence of her own actions. She kept saying it wasn't fair and that I should have waited for her. When I pointed out she was 50 minutes late, she said she'd hit traffic and couldn't help it. Later, I found out through social media that Jenna had actually been at a different friend's house before my dinner and had simply lost track of time. There was no traffic emergency. She'd just been hanging out and not paying attention to the clock, then acted like circumstances beyond her control had made her late. I decided to have a serious conversation with Jenna about her chronic lateness. I explained that showing up an hour late to my birthday dinner felt disrespectful, like my time and my celebration didn't matter to her. I mentioned how her lateness affects everyone, not just the person she's meeting, because the whole group ends up waiting or activities get delayed. Jenna's response was to get defensive. She said that's just how she is, that she has trouble with time management, that I should know by now she's always late and plan around it. She actually said I was being controlling by expecting her to be on time to things. I told Jenna that being consistently late isn't a personality trait, it's a choice. Unless she has an actual diagnosed condition affecting her time perception, being late means she's deciding that whatever she's doing is more important than respecting other people's schedules. She got upset and said I was being mean and attacking her character over something small. Several of our mutual friends have weighed in on the situation. Some think I was too harsh with Jenna and should have just accepted that she's always late. Others have said they're glad someone finally called her out because they're also tired of waiting around for Jenna and planning their schedules around her inability to show up on time. Since the birthday dinner incident, I've stopped inviting Jenna to things that require being on time. If I'm seeing a movie, going to a show, or making a reservation, she doesn't get an invitation. I'll grab coffee with her or do casual hangouts where her lateness only affects us, but I'm done letting her disrespect my time and my other friends' time. Jenna acts like I'm punishing her for being imperfect. She says real friends accept each other's flaws and that I'm being petty. But this isn't about accepting flaws, it's about refusing to enable behavior that negatively impacts everyone around her. If Jenna's lateness only affected her, I wouldn't care. But she makes other people wait, causes groups to miss reservations or show times, and never takes responsibility for the inconvenience she creates. That's the end of that story. Chronic lateness is often framed as an endearing quirk or harmless flaw, but it's actually a form of disrespect that says, my time is more valuable than yours. Jenna has probably lost multiple friendships and opportunities over the years because people eventually get tired of waiting for someone who can't be bothered to show up when they say they will. Moving on to our next tale. This one involves a neighbour who decided that normal activities were grounds for constant complaints and harassment. I'm 33 and bought my first house about 2 years ago. It's a modest single-family home in a quiet neighbourhood with a small yard and a detached garage. Most of my neighbours are friendly, and we generally coexist peacefully, without much interaction beyond occasional waves and small talk about weather or lawn care. The exception is my next-door neighbour, who I'll call Margaret. She's probably in her late 60s, retired, and, apparently, has nothing better to do than monitor every activity that happens in the surrounding houses. From the moment I moved in, Margaret has had complaints about virtually everything I do. The first complaint came about a week after I'd moved in. Margaret knocked on my door at 7:15 on a Saturday morning to tell me that I'd been making too much noise the previous evening. I'd had exactly 3 friends over for pizza while we unpacked boxes. We'd been inside my house with windows closed, talking at normal volumes, and everyone had left by 9:30. Margaret said our party had disturbed her sleep, and she expected it not to happen again. I apologised for any disturbance, but explained that having a few friends over on a Friday evening with everyone leaving by 9:30 was well within reasonable boundaries. Margaret disagreed, saying that any gathering of multiple people constituted a party, and parties weren't appropriate for a residential neighbourhood. She actually suggested I meet friends at restaurants, instead of hosting them at my own house. The complaints continued regularly. Margaret said my lawnmower was too loud when I cut my grass on Saturday mornings at 10. She said the smell of my grill bothered her when I barbecued in my own backyard. She complained that my car blocked her view when I parked in my own driveway. She claimed my outdoor lights were too bright and shined into her bedroom window at night. Every complaint was about completely normal activities that any homeowner would do. I wasn't throwing loud parties, wasn't doing construction at inappropriate hours, wasn't doing anything that would reasonably be considered disturbing the peace. Margaret just seemed to object to my existence in the house next to hers. The situation escalated when I adopted a dog from a local shelter. He's a medium-sized mixed breed, very friendly, and I make sure he gets plenty of exercise and attention. Margaret immediately complained about the barking dog next door, even though my dog rarely barks and certainly doesn't bark for extended periods. Margaret started calling animal control with complaints about my dog. They'd come out, see that my dog was well cared for and not causing any disturbance, and leave. But Margaret would call again a week later with new complaints. She said the dog barked all day while I was at work. She said the dog was aggressive and had threatened her. She said the dog was creating a nuisance. I installed a camera system to document my dog's behavior during the day. The footage showed that my dog spent most of the day sleeping on his bed inside my house, would occasionally look out the window, and barked maybe twice a day when the mail carrier approached. There was absolutely nothing that would constitute a noise complaint or animal control issue. I showed the footage to animal control when they came out for the third time. The officer was sympathetic and said they'd note in their records that the complaints appeared to be unfounded. They suggested I document everything Margaret said and did because the pattern of harassment might be grounds for legal action if it continued. Margaret then started complaining to our homeowners association about various alleged violations. She said my trash cans were visible from the street on non-collection days, which was against HOA rules, even though I kept them in my garage except on actual trash day. She said my lawn was too long, even though I mowed it weekly and it was well within the height requirements. She said I'd painted my front door without HOA approval, even though I'd used the exact same colour that was already there. Every complaint to the HOA required me to respond with evidence that I wasn't violating any rules. It was time-consuming and stressful to constantly defend myself against false accusations. The HOA eventually told Margaret to stop filing frivolous complaints and warned her that continued harassment of neighbours could result in fines. Margaret's response was to escalate further. She started standing in her yard with her phone, obviously recording video of my house and property. She'd position herself right at the property line and just stand there staring and filming. When I'd come outside, she'd make comments loudly enough for me to hear about problem neighbours and people who don't respect community standards. I consulted with a lawyer about my options. They said Margaret's behaviour could potentially constitute harassment, but that documenting everything and attempting to resolve the situation through official channels like the HOA was the right first step before considering legal action. I sent Margaret a formal letter requesting she stop harassing me, documenting all the false complaints and the impact her behaviour was having on my peaceful enjoyment of my property. She responded with her own letter, claiming that I was the one harassing her by constantly making noise and disturbing the neighbourhood. The situation finally improved when Margaret's adult son came to visit, and I had a chance to talk to him about what had been happening. He was apologetic and explained that his mother had become increasingly paranoid and difficult since retiring. He said she'd had issues with previous neighbours as well, and that the family was trying to get her to consider moving to a senior community where she wouldn't have to worry about neighbours. Margaret's complaints have decreased since her son's visit, though she still occasionally glares at me from her window or makes passive-aggressive comments about neighbourhood standards. I've accepted that she's probably never going to be a friendly neighbour, but at least the constant false complaints have stopped. The whole experience taught me that some people will create conflict and drama no matter what you do. Margaret wasn't responding to any actual problem I was causing. She was looking for things to complain about because she apparently enjoyed the conflict or felt some need to control her surroundings by policing her neighbour's behaviour. That's the end of that story. Neighbours who complain about normal activities, like having friends over or owning a dog, are really just looking for an excuse to harass people. Margaret's pattern of false complaints to various authorities wasted a lot of people's time and energy, all because she couldn't tolerate the reality that other people get to exist in their own homes without her approval. Our final story for this collection comes from someone who learned that family members can have wildly unrealistic expectations about free childcare. I'm 32 and work from home as a software engineer. My job is flexible in terms of hours, but demanding in terms of focus and concentration. I need quiet time to write code, attend virtual meetings, and meet project deadlines. Working from home doesn't mean I'm available for random interruptions or favors during business hours. My younger sister Emily is 27 and has 2 kids, ages 3 and 5. She works part-time as a dental hygienist, and her husband works construction. They've always had complicated childcare arrangements, cobbling together preschool, after-school programs, grandparent help, and occasionally calling in sick to work when nothing else works out. Last year, Emily started asking me to watch her kids occasionally when her regular childcare fell through. The first few times, it was presented as an emergency. Her babysitter was sick, her mother-in-law had a doctor's appointment, the preschool was closed unexpectedly. I'd help out because that's what family does in true emergencies. But the emergencies started happening more and more frequently. What had been once every couple months turned into once a month, then twice a month, then weekly. Emily would text me the night before, or even the morning of, saying she needed me to watch the kids for the day. If I said no, she'd act like I was letting her down and potentially causing her to lose her job. The bigger issue was that Emily didn't seem to understand that watching her kids meant I couldn't work. She'd drop them off at 8 in the morning and pick them up at 5:30, expecting me to entertain them all day while still somehow completing my actual job. Her kids are at ages where they need constant supervision and attention. I can't just set them up with toys and ignore them for 8 hours while I work. When I tried to explain this to Emily, she said that since I work from home, watching kids should be easy because I'm already there. She couldn't grasp the concept that working from home is still working, not hanging out at home available for babysitting duty. She'd say things like, "You can just keep an eye on them while you do your computer stuff," as if coding and attending meetings were casual activities I could do while simultaneously caring for 2 young children. The situation came to a head when Emily asked me to watch her kids for an entire week while she and her husband went on a vacation. Not a trip for work, not an emergency, a planned vacation to celebrate their anniversary. She said she'd already booked it and needed me to help out with childcare since they couldn't afford to pay for a week of daycare on top of the vacation costs. I told Emily I couldn't take a week off work to provide free childcare. She got upset and said I was being selfish, that family helps family, and that she'd helped me out plenty of times over the years, so I owed her. When I asked for examples of when she'd helped me that would be equivalent to a week of free childcare, she couldn't come up with anything substantial. She mentioned times she'd given me a ride somewhere or let me borrow something, minor favours that in no way compared to caring for 2 children for 40 hours a week. Emily tried to guilt me by saying they'd have to cancel their vacation if I didn't help, that they desperately needed this time together, that I was potentially damaging their marriage by refusing to watch the kids. I stood firm and said no. Emily ended up asking our parents, who also said no. She eventually found a daycare that would take the kids for the week, though she complained endlessly about the cost and blamed me for forcing her to spend money unnecessarily. After that, I established clear boundaries with Emily about childcare. I told her I could help out maybe once every 2 or 3 months in genuine emergencies, but that regular childcare wasn't something I could provide while maintaining my job. Emily responded by saying, I clearly didn't care about my niece and nephew and that I valued money over family. Our relationship has been strained ever since. Emily makes passive-aggressive comments at family gatherings about how busy I must be with my computer job and how she wishes she had the luxury of working from home with no responsibilities. She tells other family members that I refuse to help with the kids, leaving out the context about frequency and impact on my work. Some relatives think I should be more flexible, since I do work from home and family should help each other. Others understand that working from home is still working, and that Emily was taking advantage of my situation. My parents have tried to stay neutral but have suggested maybe I could help out more if Emily really needs it. I've maintained my boundaries despite the family pressure. Watching Emily's kids occasionally, in true emergencies, is fine. Being treated as free, on-demand childcare because I work from home isn't something I'm willing to accept. Emily needs to figure out reliable childcare arrangements that don't depend on unpaid labor from family members who have their own jobs and responsibilities. That's the end of that story. Working from home doesn't mean you're running a free daycare service for family members who don't want to pay for actual childcare. Emily's sense of entitlement to unlimited free babysitting, because I happen to work from my house, shows a fundamental lack of respect for my time and career. Some family members will take every inch you give them and then complain when you finally say enough. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones that remind us our own lives aren't quite as messy as they could be. See you next time.